speed is frequently conflated with doing as many things as possible at the same time. And as you know from your personal life, that doesn't usually equate to everything getting done faster than if you take one thing and focus on it and move on to the next.
Sure.
There is a need to focus wholeheartedly in a sequenced way, and it will get you there quicker a lot of the time than trying to take too much on at once, and also more successfully with better outcomes and fewer compromises.
I'm Nick Dyment, and this is the Electric Mindset.
You want to be the person in the room who asks the most questions.
There's no shortage of problems to tackle.
Where's the change part? Where's the people part you talked about?
This is going to be one of those moments of history that we're going to look back on.
Welcome back to Electric Mindset. I'm your host, Nick Dyment, Chief of Staff at Electric Mind, an AI-forward consulting firm driving the future of digital transformation. With me today, I've got Paul Kalinowski, a legend in capital markets and wealth management, a pretty cool guy, and a leader with lots of experience. So, Paul, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Nick.
Yeah, you're very welcome. We know that outdated platforms slow modernization. They just kind of get in the way of progress. I know you've got a lot of experience, fighting the good fight for people. So we're excited to talk about that. But before we do, I want to get to know you. Paul, I want to learn about your career. How did you get started?
I've had a bit of a wonky path to where I am now, in and out of consulting and industry. And obviously you can tell I'm not a Canadian born, although naturalized Canadian.
Okay.
I studied law, ended up as a financial advisor out of university for a while. But when I came over to Canada, I started my career in consulting for a few years, went over into industry, which was, a cool way to apply and live through some of the recommendations and things like that. Worked my way through a couple of different roles in wealth and capital markets over the last 8 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And recently decided to join yourself and the team back on the consulting side, kind of re-entering that space with all that I've learned and experienced on the industry side.
Yeah, man, we're happy to have you here, and it's not our first time working together, so I missed you, man. Yeah.
You too. It's good to be back.
It's exciting. Okay, if you were going to 1v1 someone in sports, what sport would it be?
That's interesting, because I would have said boxing a few years ago, but the age and slowing down, it's probably not going to work out so good for me. Something where I can't really get injured. Maybe tennis, something like that.
Oh, you're very mature. Mature answer. The thing is the competition's also aged and slowed down. So
Oh, well, if that's the case and I can pick who I'm actually against, then maybe it'd change it. But yeah, fatherhood will do that. Version.
I hear you. Beautiful. All right. Well, let's get into some stuff here talking, digital transformation. So, what's a story that you learned early on in your journey that you can share?
I think, one of the most important lessons I learned quite early on was the idea of compartmentalizing, prioritizing, and pacing yourself when taking these things on. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the energy, the enthusiasm when you're tackling a problem without the experience of working through some of the bigger, scarier stuff means you try and take on too much concurrently at once. So I really tried to hone the ability to really break the problem down and focus on piece by piece the priorities that are most important to the business or whatever outcome people are looking for.
Yeah, and maybe for the people watching here, if they don't know kind of the space, wealth management, cap markets, and digital transformation, maybe just some general examples. Like, what is the kind of size of some of these projects, the duration?
Yeah,
can you give an example?
Yeah, look, a lot of that's dependent on a number of different factors, including the size and scale of the business, whether it's regional or global. Even though wealth and capital markets domains are pretty consistent, there's also players that have different exposure to products and, play in some areas and not others. So it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. However, having said that, I'd say some of the general trends, wealth management deals with a couple of different clients. You have the end client, but you also have, the teams of advisors and various different people within the industry that are also the clients of many of the wealth broker firms. You have asset managers, and in capital markets, you're dealing with institutions and businesses. So it's a bit different from your usual everyday day-to-day banking problems because you're throwing in the complexities of those layers and different products.
Yeah. I mean, basically these are complex problems that sometimes take, years, and then and millions of dollars to solve. So they're pretty sizable.
Well, I think you're always, hopefully looking at a horizon that's, 4 to 5 years out for where you want to go strategically. And to your point, you're always perpetually evolving and moving towards that. But you're trying to find those things that you can deliver in meaningful increments, maybe a year, 18 months, to really see step changes in what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go.
Yeah, I love that. So legacy technology is not everyone's cup of tea, but somehow this is the battle you've chosen to fight now. Why'd you get into that?
I think it's a natural evolution of where transformation and the challenges that face a lot of firms are really headed. It's important to start by understanding and thinking about where are you from an experience and design perspective, and where do you want to be in terms of how you provide your products to your customers and service them, clients, whether they are institutional or individual. But a lot of time and money was spent over the last few years kind of building out those front-end visible parts of businesses and their technology, and a lot of wrapping and working around that legacy technology. And I think that where we're at from an industry perspective is some of those big challenges, or being able to get to the next level of scale, efficiency, growth. It really is time to tackle some of those monolithic core legacy applications that are at the heart of these businesses.
Yeah, it's scary though. As an architect, I get to see some of these enterprise diagrams, and usually at the heart is some mainframe. And then you got layer and layer and layer, and typically the projects, like you said, last few years is just add another layer on the outside.
Yeah, exactly. Just another set of lines coming off. The same infrastructure. I mean, you've got a great position to see it. I was talking about seeing it from the front down. Seeing it architecturally just probably is as scary, if not more.
A different side of the same coin, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you've been at this for a while. Your early experiences in digital transformation. How did that shape your approach today?
I think it's what you said around the wrapping and the layers that usually go around those legacy systems. Is my early experiences were really focused on more of the end user experience technology. So defining the current experience and journey that clients and various different stakeholders go through, and then really focusing on how to enhance, build out, and integrate that experience that they can see, feel, and interact with. And I think it took me a bit of time and some frustration and all the rest of it to realize there are limitations in what you can achieve looking at those layers really alone. And as I maybe alluded to before, trying to tackle so much initially and push as many things forward concurrently is a bit of a lesson learned. Prioritization, focus, and strategic conviction are really, some lessons learned.
Yeah, because I like that phrase, because you got to commit.
Yeah. There's always a shiny ball. There's always another direction or an evolution of the technology you're working with. And that's why it's important to break it up so that you don't ever get too far away from where you're trying to head, and some of the evolution of the tools to get you there.
Sure, and you can get some value relatively quickly, rather than waiting 5 years and praying.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think there's much appetite anymore, if there ever was, for multi-year mega programs designed in a waterfall manner where everyone's kind of hanging around until you see the outcomes. I think most firms, especially across financial services, have moved away from that kind of viewpoint.
Yeah. Too bad, because when I was starting out, I worked on a project where we had 3 floors of a hotel. There's about 80 business analysts collecting requirements for 6 months, and it was an awesome party.
Yeah. Well, they're the trenches, that's where you form your relationships.
Yeah.
And I bet, 60 or 70 of those business analysts are still your friends now.
Sure.
Going on to do different things, and probably half of our clients as well.
Yeah. But by the time people got around to actually coding some of the requirements we got, 2 years had happened, and 60% of those people didn't work there anymore.
And probably 30% of the requirements have changed.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. It's not the most efficient way
of developing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's 2025. Like, we're in this golden age of AI. And why is legacy technology still a problem?
I think that, I have this conversation with clients quite regularly from various different points of frustration and understanding. But the core of it is the realization, I think, that data is going to unlock the capabilities, the functionality, and the experience that you're trying to achieve to be differentiated in the marketplace. And the way software was designed when some of these core systems were put in was very much, we will build software in a monolithic, we will solve the problem within this application approach. And that is, essentially they didn't have to consider the ecosystem or any kind of up or downstream integrations. You would use a system specifically for a purpose and almost on its own.
Sure.
So as we're really moving to composable architecture, you'll know a lot more than me about this, but the ability to kind of plug in, pull out, and connect various different pieces, it really is a hangover and a limitation of previous levels of technology capability that does frequently, in the worst cases, limit what you're ever able to achieve. And even in medium and mild cases, adds time, cost, prevents you from building something that doesn't take an army of people to look after on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm having some flashbacks to some of these systems. And yeah, if you point to that mainframe at the bottom and say, I want to change that, everything's connected to that.
Yeah.
If you're in that monolithic worldview, it's frightening. You got to have a lot of conviction to go for it.
I mean, that's the thing as well, is that these systems have been entrenched over the years, entrenched by technology, entrenched by business and operating model and processes. Because a lot of the time, we'll go in and we'll talk to firms or I've run teams where you ask why a team is structured a certain way or they do their work a certain way. And the answer is because that's the way the system works and drives the work.
Yeah.
So, the build out of teams and capabilities around that just further entrenches that technology into the fabric of that business and the way it operates.
Yeah. It's connected beyond just the system, like to the people and the process and hierarchies and hiring plans and all that stuff. I mean, it's very complex. So what are maybe some of the hidden costs in keeping this legacy around?
I mean, you can look at it from a few different angles. So you talk about cost as the word that triggers most people kind of start down these projects because of cost. So the ability to take advantage of more flexible, scalable, lower cost technology infrastructure models is usually a primary driver. At the end of the day, migrating some of these legacy systems to a cloud-based environment or, kind of compartmentalizing the functionality and modernizing it to something that's more cost effective is definitely one string. We're also seeing a risk, though, in terms of knowledge and capability gaps in supporting this stuff. We're seeing less and less capable and knowledgeable individuals in the industry to be able to support these systems. There is a real retirement risk around some of those key talent pools. And essentially, we're going to get to a point where a lot of this isn't supported. We can also look at the fact that, as I alluded to, if you're not able to ever achieve those experience outcomes, you may never be able to differentiate yourself in the way that you'd like, which hinders your growth, your ability to grow your business and drive revenue.
Yeah. Talking about some of these training aspects, I remember on a project I was shadowing in a contact center, and they were onboarding someone, training them, and so we got to follow along. And they had to use a green screen to do some credit card processing, like TS2. And trying to explain to someone, you have to move the cursor to position C3 to enter this field. Like, what is happening? Like, I don't understand how to use a computer like this. And so, that would have been a hidden cost. Every 20-year-old that you're hiring into your contact center is going to go through this, like, why can't I touch it? Why can't I tab through? Why can't I, right? Yeah,
exactly. Well, and, you have no or very limited ability to find your experience efficiencies from a user perspective, as you said, you're clicking around, you're tabbing around, you're following a very rigid process designed by someone 30 or 40 years ago. It's quite scary how prevalent it is, but it shows the depth and the kind of urgency of the challenge that people are facing.
Yeah. So I think you touched on a couple of drivers for why this is good, right? It's not if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's limiting, the ability to come up with new products, train people. There's a lot of these hidden risks. In your opinion, what is maybe the most misunderstood aspect of modernization?
I think it's the perception that this is a technology only problem. And I spoke to some of those capabilities, the way that businesses and teams are structured and processes flow, being driven by their underlying systems and capabilities. So a lot of the time I've seen the need for this modernization, more than it isn't, is driven out of a technology decision to modernize. And that is related to the risk around supporting systems, the infrastructure, target architecture goals that businesses have. But one of the biggest misconceptions is that this is a tech problem that tech can fix alone. A lot of the time, at the end of the day, these systems are all there to be able to provide capabilities and functionalities necessary to operate the business successfully, deliver services for clients, end users, and key stakeholders. So the teams that are constructed and the way that they are engaged needs to consider both the business needs and desired outcomes, as well as the technology and the goals of that group at the same time.
Yeah. It made me think of an example, the idea of a customer record, customer master, customer 360, an org to have a single view of a customer. As a person that lives in the world, ignoring, all my experience. So why can't, this bank, this financial institution, this company know me and all my products? And I know why they can't. The systems are constructed that way. They're old, there's the way their hierarchy is. But that would be so frustrating if you're on the product team, right? Or you're in marketing. I want to talk to Paul. I don't want to have to somehow send you 4 different emails because you got 4 different products with me, right?
Yeah, 100%. And, I think at the heart of, a threat to the existing players in the industry is the fact that, to your point, they're older, they're part of a legacy technology infrastructure that the businesses were built on. That, I think, is where people can see, as other new entrants from different spaces, be it maybe technology, start to look at financial services and enter into that market. They have the advantage of greenfield builds. You would never today build your organization around a green screen core system like that if you were starting from scratch. And so I think that's the challenge, where you're looking at the industry now. They need to tackle modernization. Otherwise, those experiential goals and one view of a customer, or be it straight through processing or automated service, instant decisioning in a lot of adjudication cases with financial products, they're a lot easier to achieve those if you're building your technology greenfield. So we really need to, as an industry, tackle these problems so that we can remain competitive. And have the same players kind of keep going.
And, while that's an option for some of these players with legacy technology, blow it all up and start again, it's maybe not always. There's a lot of reasons why that's got its own risks.
Yep.
So, let's say that someone's listening, watching, hanging out, and nodding along so far. Like, that sounds like problems that I'm having.
Yep.
How would you approach, or how, generally speaking, do you approach this problem of modernization?
So there's a couple of frameworks that are not really, there's not secret sauce, but good starting points to really look at this. First of all, as we said, some of these applications, being monolithic in their design, contain numerous different capabilities or functions. There may be calculations, there may be different production of reports, or where data sits at rest. There's different things that these systems do that you would not necessarily put into the same system now on a go-forward basis. So drawing out that picture of those capabilities within the system and understanding their differences and nuances as a starting point is really important. And you go through the frameworks that you would generally use to tackle transformation anyway, of business and strategic alignment. What are my consumer and key stakeholder experience requirements? What are my functional and non-functional requirements? Data integration, security, resourcing, cost, and risk. So they would be the kind of main blocks that I would use to kind of dissect this and provide a framework to analyze each of those components and start to plan and think about what does a future state look like for those. And you're not necessarily, and you don't need to hold yourself in the thought process of they will all be transplanted into one brand new system. They can go to different places.
Yeah, smart. You don't need a one-size-fits-all solution, right? Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a process to kind of tackle this modernization. It doesn't all have to go into one, solution. It can go into many.
Yep.
So then there's some decisions to make, right? I've broken up my problem. How do I know what to keep, what to throw away, and what to, upgrade?
I mean, that's, again, a very interesting question, and one that has very local nuances. So you have the monolithic application we're talking about here that we're trying to replace. You also have an ecosystem, like you said, that's built up around that system. A lot of the time, when you start analyzing that broader ecosystem, there are capabilities that exist in some of those other more modern systems around this that can migrate some of that functionality there. So you might not be replacing or refactoring or rebuilding 100% of that capability. You could find homes in your existing technology stack for a lot of those capabilities and functions.
And that would probably save some cash. Like if I'm already paying for some product over here that does, I don't know, the models, let's say, or something, some piece of the puzzle.
Yep.
Yeah, just going to move that over there and think of the savings.
Exactly. And the answer before was, well, why didn't we do that before? Well, we had this application that already did it. It was hard to talk to from a technical perspective. But if we're going down that journey, we can start to rehome some of those capabilities into the existing stack, which then means you have a shorter pole in the tent to replace the remaining functionality. You can look at those different functions and go through a scoring framework and analysis across those different vectors we talked about before, just to understand, okay, like how hard, how long, how much is it going to cost me? What's my go forward state as a result of be it a buy or a build? And that's really a large part of our job, is helping our clients figure out how to tackle this problem within their own unique ecosystem with their own strategy and how they're trying to get there.
Yeah. And, and critically knowing that the business can't just go on pause for a couple of years while you do a gut job reno, right? Like these changes need to be done, without or with absolute minimal disruption. So when you're thinking through that, because I've been in some of these meetings, all that stuff sounds great, but the call center's open for 6 days a week, or the website, like we're 24/7 shop. How are you going to actually pull this off without disruption? What are your tips and tricks there, maybe?
I think you said home reno, and I use that analogy so much when working with clients, because a family living in a house that's being renovated is always going to experience a level of disruption. You can manage it, you can plan it, you can put special accommodations in place, but there will be disruption. And I think one of the things I've seen is whether it's rooted in trying to get the approval of a program or project, or trying to minimize how big a deal this might seem when you're trying to kick things off and drive things forward, it's frequently underswung. People don't realistically understand the disruption they're going to have to proactively deal with, or they mischaracterize or think it's going to be in one area and not another. So you can really tackle that a few different ways. Coexistence strategy from a business and a technology perspective is, again, something we spend a lot of time with our clients working through. And it's understanding that if you're taking a system that was built to perform numerous functions and you are migrating away from that system, it would be very, very unlikely that's going to happen in a big bang switch over approach. You will see those pieces and capabilities go to those existing or new systems, and you're going to have things like swivel chair, additional reconciliation steps if you have data now in two places, documents that might not be in the same system. And really, part of the planning around your disruption is understanding, as a part of your roadmap and where you're going to be driving this, what dependencies do you have on core functions or business processes? You wouldn't want to break up a critical process too much or for too long. I think about AML, KYC, those kind of processes that are critical regulatory processes in every institution. You need to be incredibly careful about how you're migrating through those, so you're not creating risk around the process with the reconciliation or the disparate data.
Yeah. But it looks so good on a project plan where you just have a line, and then there's star, and then changes, and then you had a new line with all the new stuff, Paul.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it, isn't it? I think that lived experience is again what we're kind of talking about here, of it can be drawn out so smoothly and with hypothetical efficiency. Understanding those codependencies, and you may need to scale up from a resourcing perspective on the technology or the business side, or both, as you're transitioning through to a new architecture, a new operating model, and new capabilities.
Yeah. Sounds like you're maybe advocating for, some real talk in this project planning, not fantasy land.
Well, that's hopefully what, you can bring with some of the years of experience that the team has, is the ability to say, that sounds great, But for example, how are we going to source the data? What other programs and projects are we up against concurrently in the ecosystem when it comes to prioritization of key resources? Mm-hmm. Where are you on your approvals process for funding, life cycles, release of capital? Mm-hmm. These are all kind of the experiences that come with doing a few of these, that you realize, capability and technical functionality alone, there's more to the game that's being played that needs to be considered to have the best experience possible on one of these difficult transformation journeys.
Yeah. I like what you're saying. Rather plan for, real life.
Yeah.
And not be surprised than I don't know, close your eyes and hope it, when you flip the switch, it all works perfectly.
Exactly.
No, that's lived experience for sure. So let's keep it on the real talk then. We're kind of talking generically, some processes, but there's lots of real experience too. Like, do you want to share some real world examples?
Yeah. So, for example, there was a large transformation of a client lifecycle, onboarding, KYC, offboarding, refreshing a client ecosystem. And I use the term ecosystem because the starting point was around a monolithic application, more legacy technology at the heart of that process. It drove a lot of the team's processes, the organization of the business, and also meant that there were a lot of off-platform workarounds created. And I think that's something that probably resonates with people who stuck this long with us into this podcast is people compensate outside of these systems by creating end-user computing, Excel models,
sure,
whatever it may be, further complicating the fact that, well, you're creating and you're manipulating data and that now sits on someone's desktop or a shared drive somewhere. Maybe the endpoint of a calculation is re-entered into the system, but the how we got from 1 to 5 as a number has happened somewhere else. One of the things that we really did to tackle that is design the future state ecosystem across business and technology, together with those teams working very much hand in hand. The idea that we work a certain way because the system allows us to, or I might not be able to engineer a way of working if I don't know what technology can truly do for me because I haven't had that experience. So having the technologists with this is what is available now and into the future in terms of capability, sit with the business side leaders and say, understand more about what you're trying to do and why. You can be a lot more collaborative in suggesting better ways of working. And then breaking that problem down into ways to isolate the impact of that core platform as much as possible before you start really tackling and ripping at the guts of what you need to do. You can do some of that on the business side. You can standardize policies, procedures, create cleaner, more manageable processes that ultimately mean you're building less into the future state. You can take some of those capabilities that are either done in the system or around the system offline today and automate and drive those to create capacity. So for example, in my onboarding example, it was, well, we still have people manually searching for documents or consuming documents or checking IDs or searching, key people in terms of know your client, know your customer. How do you automate those pieces and start to take the bricks out of the wall so that all you're left with is that core application when it comes time to go?
Yeah. Something you said there, the technologists needing to understand why the business it wants to do what it wants. I feel like I've worked with a lot of great people in technology, and sometimes, we get our best results when we understand the motivation of the business, and that's a two-way street too, right? So if I understand why, if my peers understand why and can really get behind the vision, then you can start to suggest some of these changes, and uncover, some of these optimizations that you're talking about. So yeah, working hand in hand. My experience always gets to the best result.
Well, I think that's one of the key recipes for success on any of these difficult transformation journeys. One of the things that I love about this conversation and the way we're approaching this is I did start life on the business side, and you on the technology side. You said we work very well together in trying to understand from each other's point of view what we're trying to achieve. I think if more time was spent focusing on that organizationally, culturally, at the start and during programs, the results would uplift themselves and you would see better outcomes than maybe focusing on some of the other areas that are frequently invested in to try and accelerate things.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. So agree to agree on that one. So we're talking about the what, maybe some of the pacing here. Everyone seems to be in a rush to do all these projects. Well, they're expensive and they're risky, and I get it. Yeah. But where have you seen, modernization go bad? You're trying to hustle too quickly.
I think quickly is the word that I would kind of anchor my response on, really, is that speed is frequently conflated with doing as many things as possible at the same time. And as you know from your personal life, that doesn't usually equate to everything getting done faster than if you take one thing and focus on it and move on to the next.
Sure.
And I think that, that desire for speed, at the end of the day, a business case to modernize always has endpoint and incremental value. And as you said, risk as you're going through that transformation. So theoretically, if you can shorten that timeline, if you can scale the team sideways, take on more concurrently, theoretically, you can achieve greater speed and get to that end result quicker. But really, in practice, what you've seen is confusion, fragmentation, dependencies arise that people weren't aware were there. Also, conflicts. If things are being developed concurrently, they're not necessarily checked against each other for whether that works in a go-forward process. So I'm not saying that there are no situations where you can't scale and get things done quicker, but frequently there is a need to focus wholeheartedly in a sequenced way, and it will get you there quicker a lot of the time than trying to take too much on at once, and also more successfully with better outcomes and fewer compromises.
Yeah, so well-managed, well-structured teams with realistic outcomes is going to go a long way. And now we're in this kind of golden age of AI. In my personal opinion, talking with Chris previously, a bit of a natural skeptic on some of these new technologies, but the last 8 months, 6 months, I'm really starting to personally see the gains and the promise coming to fruition. So applying, some of these tools and toolkits to this problem of modernization, like where do you see the opopportunity?
There's a couple of different areas. I'm going to throw one back to you,
sure.
actually,
Yep.
Knowing your experience. Try and drag you and your expertise into this answer. The services that we deliver span across that life cycle of transformation. There's a lot of strategy, design, developing the requirements, where we want to go, testing things, and then there's building, engineering, and delivering technology. A really exciting application of AI for me has been the acceleration of some of those tasks you said, 3 floors of a hotel, 60 BAs, the ability to convert regulatory documentation into requirements or write requirements from pre-existing software as a first point of call it's really that ability to take a lot of that upfront work and rationalize and accelerate it. People frequently look for ways to do this work in more cost-effective manners, whether that's resourcing strategies that are more global in nature. But watching what we've been able to do with AI in terms of driving that requirement writing, converting requirements into test cases, helping with some of the automation around program delivery, we can be much more efficient, effective, cost-effective, and sometimes more accurate because there's less people to wrangle to get to the end goal. So, we know that right now, human-in-the-loop deployment of AI is really still very, very necessary as everyone gets comfortable, including regulators, with its capability. But it provides the scale of having a much bigger, more effective and faster team for a fraction of the cost. That's on the business side. And where I said I was going to try and pull you in it is knowing what you've started to experience on actually engineering using AI and accelerating some of those processes.
Yeah, I mean, some of the big lift is using AI, for code generation and being able to go from requirements to, a living piece of software deployed somewhere in the cloud that people can touch, and reducing that time from, I've seen years when I started out, months to weeks or less. You can have better conversations, more efficient conversations. So you're not, I don't think it's efficient when you're looking at a 15-page business requirement document outlining what somebody wants and reviewing it for weeks to make sure the requirements are perfect.
Yeah.
I'd rather take that first cut and spend a week with a team of experts using as much code gen tech as we can, using CI/CD pipelines to pump stuff out to the cloud, so that the next time we meet, we can show you, hey, based on your requirements, I think this is what you want.
Yep.
And then we're getting feedback about V1 of the product, the screens, the APIs, whatever they are, the financial models. And those conversations are just way more constructive. And then you kind of get to a point where the requirements have done their job and they're in the bin and we're iterating on the product and we're really in product development. So your point about accuracy, like I'd rather take a meandering road to get to what you want through, rapid iterative development rather than argue about some table in figure 5 of page 17 of the BRD, which I've done. And again, we charge by the hour, okay, but it's not as fulfilling. So I think that's been a big lift. And your point too about smaller teams, like the social fear of losing your job to AI aside, when you have fewer people being able to deliver more using productivity tool, yeah, you don't have to wrangle those people. It's easier to get 4 people to understand an objective than to get 40 people to all be rowing the boat in the same direction. And I've noticed a change with that too. So it's higher throughput, more accurate. We're getting stuff done faster, at least the first iterations. And so the quality and getting the thing that the clients, the business people like you actually want, that actually get the hands on, get the end users in it early, that's been a huge win.
Well, I think, what you're saying there around, the fear of job loss and all the rest of it. At the end of the day, productivity is what we're looking for. A lot of the experiences I've had on the institutional side, there's no shortage of problems to tackle.
Sure.
There's no shortage of things to get done. It's always a battle every year through capital expenditure cycles and funding cycles to determine, okay, which of the 100 things we want to do, which 10 are we going to really try and tackle? And to your point, that's based on resourcing capacity. There are some other dependencies as well. And not to contradict what I said about concurrency, but you're able to focus teams on more problems because you're removing those non-value added or lower value added steps and really focusing the team on sharing information, evaluating what we've done, further evolving the product or the outcome. So it's exciting for me.
Yeah,
this is all going.
Yeah, and we've been talking, technology. Well, we've been talking lots of things. Maybe not just technology, but at the end of the day, these big programs they're a people problem.
Yeah,
in a sense, right? And so, what do you do, or how can we as a firm, help people get started on what can feel like an overwhelming process?
I think, at the end of the day, there's a series of stakeholders and personas involved in these kind of challenges. Mm-hmm. And the reason why persona development, journey development, service delivery journey development has taken off as both a concept and a successful way to really start and begin and start driving these projects is because it really captures different perspectives of the current challenge and the future that we want to design and develop together. And so maybe in years gone by, it could have been a bit myopic from one perspective or another as to why we're doing something or who the outcome is for in the end. I think from a people perspective, using personas to really capture what people need. What does a client expect? What do key business stakeholders need to be successful? What do servicing and functional and operational teams need to be provided with to provide the level of service that's going to differentiate your brand and your product? Understanding and capturing those people's needs early on is really key. And then keeping people really focused on the so what and the why of that future state. If you have those personas, you can talk to each of those stakeholders in a very direct and meaningful way that's going to resonate with them around, we're doing this so that in future your experience is X. And let's take something that's lesser talked about, the operational users. I'm sure you don't love copying information from one screen into another. I'm sure you don't love trying to extract data from 5 or 6 different systems, work it out through a macro you've built, and then re-enter that information into a further system. I think you probably take more from those challenges where something's changed or gotten stuck or requires your expertise or knowledge to deal with a client or customer or another business stakeholder. The goal of this is to really push your work more towards that and away from the stuff you don't enjoy doing.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the ways that technology, I think, can make people's lives better. Because I don't love copying data from one thing to the other. I'll tell you right now.
Me neither.
And I don't love doing timesheets. I need to make an AI agent to do my timesheets.
I know that one. Yeah, for sure. Just don't mention it to Chris.
Exactly. All right. Before we close out here, is there anything that you want to talk about that I didn't prompt you for?
I think what I would say is, at the end of the day, these problems are avoided. Modernization, they have been avoided, is probably a better way to describe it. I think a lot of firms are really realizing that we've done everything we can with front-end digital experiences and wrapping in a lot of these situations. We're really going to have to eat this elephant. So rather than shying away from that, hopefully it's sitting down and talking today has helped people understand that this is something that can be done if it's planned, compartmentalized, and thought about holistically. This is something that can really unlock the step change in the next capability in your business and the next phase of scale, efficiency, and growth. So it's a target you should be walking towards and, an area where you should be excited to take your career versus something you do your utmost to avoid.
Fair play. And that would behoove me to say, when we got your back at Electric Mind, hit us up. All right, perfect. Okay, great. Well, then let's move to the lightning round.
Okay.
I'm going to do quick hit questions, and I'm looking for a quick hit answer. Okay, this is my shtick. It's episode 2. Try it out. Okay, you with me?
Yep.
All right, awesome. Okay. What's the biggest myth about modernization?
Technology only.
Okay. What's one tool you always recommend for system upgrades?
It's evolving to AI.
Okay. Okay. And what's the best first step for people to take who feel stuck?
Break the problem down into manageable chunks and prioritize. That wasn't very
It's
quick.
okay. It's
That
more
wasn't
than
very
we're
quick.
working on workshopping.
Break the
It's okay.
problem down.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
there you
It's
go.
all good. Well, thanks a million, Paul.
Thanks.
What a treat getting to talk with you here in a studio. It's so formal and fancy.
Yeah.
I know we got a cool logo and everything like that.
Sign and
Fake
everything.
plants.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone. If you've been watching this long, for listening, watching, hanging out with the Electric Mindset. I'm your host, Nick Dyment. You can reach me at nick@electricmind.com. You can find the company at electricmind.com. Paul, where can people find you?
Paul at electricmind.com.
I didn't want to, I didn't want to presume.
Yeah, no, it's good. Nice and easy.
Yeah, we had to make charitable donations for that. I thought that was a nice,
We did.
a nice one. So, well, awesome. Until next time, I'm Nick Dyment. Stay bold, stay curious. The future's bright.